Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wenqi Yu. National security concerns dominate today's discussion in Washington, D.C., including the United States' relationship with China. If anything, China and Taiwan are the rare issues of bipartisan consensus. However, some view national security through a different lens. Threats such as climate change and global warming are viewed by many as more imminent and deserve a more urgent response. Therefore, US-China relations must be reevaluated if the two biggest emitters and economies were to solve the global challenge together. Today's guest is Alan Yu Guanlun, Senior Vice President of the DC-based think tank, Center for American Progress, CAP. Previously, Alan was a senior advisor to the U.S. Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. He worked in the Department of Energy during the Obama administration and worked on the historic Paris Agreement in 2015. Welcome, Alan.
好，谢谢文琪，很高兴今天跟你讨论中美关系。
Excellent.
呃
So what is a progressive, principled, and pragmatic approach toward China policy, which is a recent report that CAP just published, and how is it different from the current Biden administration approach?
Thanks, Wenqi. Very happy to join you and TVBS today to talk a little bit about what CAP is doing regarding U.S.-China relations, but also, more importantly, how we are looking at the challenges and really the important opportunities in the relationship between the U.S. and China. So a little bit of background. I mean, I know many of your viewers are very aware that the political discussion in the United States on U.S.-China relations can sometimes be, very heated and sometimes, very strong and confrontational. I think that there are obviously many reasons for this. Some of them legitimate. Some of them, I think, that we at CAP have concerns about. And so it's in that context, though, that we've had conversations with many policymakers in Washington that recognize that the political discussion on U.S.-China relations can be very complicated, but that there are a surprising number of policymakers that recognize that there's an important objective in lowering the temperature on the rhetoric in order to find opportunities where the United States and China can work together on some really serious challenges, and most importantly, climate change.
And so, my big question is, right? So, for a long time, the US has sought to collaborate with China, and the two countries did collaborate or appeared to collaborate. And the more recent change of approach and tone moved from collaboration to competition. But it sounds like CAP still feels that there needs to be collaboration. So the question is, can the two ideas, the two concepts actually coexist? It seems like the US is more able to compartmentalize the two ideas, but what about China based on your experience?
Yeah, no, it's that is the real challenge. What I will say is that, as I think about it, and many people in Washington think about it, as we look at our relationships with countries around the world, particularly countries kind of at our peer level, such as China, but also our counterparts in Europe, Japan, South Korea, Canada, Mexico, there is a continuum of competition and cooperation on our agenda with all of those countries, right? And so it's not a black and white question. There are areas in which we have very, very strong cooperation with Europe in particular, but for example. But also, there are areas in which we have strong disagreements and we have competition. That's just the nature of relationships. That's the situation with China. There was a time earlier on, particularly during the Obama administration, where there was further along the continuum of cooperation. But at the same time, we still had competition. And now the nature of the relationship has changed. There is obviously a stronger lean towards the areas in which we have disagreement and we need to resolve. And there's a little less room for cooperation politically. Cap would argue that there are important challenges out there, but also important reasons for both governments to try to find the political space to cooperate. Climate is one area. There are other areas as well.
So it seems to me that in the past, cooperation was prioritized over competition, and more recently, it's the opposite. What's interesting, in particular, to me, is that climate change as an issue area was viewed for a long time as sort of, oh, the only thing that U.S. and China can work together. However, we've also seen that these two countries are now competing in the related areas, right? Let's look at, for example, electronic vehicles, and batteries, all these related productions and manufacturing. It seems that it's also becoming a more competitive relationship. So how should the two countries really? How can the two countries really work together when the nature of the relationship has become so competitive, even in this area?
Yeah, no, I agree with that characterization. The interesting thing about climate change is it's such a multifaceted policy problem. There are all those issue areas that you identify where there's competition, on clean energy technology, both in the development as well as in the trade of those items. But there's also a large area of large number of examples of areas in which the two countries can
And
cooperate.
what are they
Yeah,
specifically?
yeah. So we are each dealing with trying to lower greenhouse gas emissions in our respective countries, and there's policy research, there's technology research in questions such as how to reduce the amount of methane gas that is being released as a part of in China, particularly as a part of coal methane, coal bed methane, coal mining methane. In the United States, there's methane reduction technologies that we're trying to understand better. There's room for cooperation there. There's room for cooperation on trying to understand how to make our economies more electrified. China is doing some really interesting work on trying to move renewable energy production, mainly from the West to key, highly developed parts in the East. The United States has a lot of clean energy production, particularly in the center of the country, trying to move that to big energy consuming parts on the West Coast and East Coast. Those are challenges that we both are trying to figure out, and there are a lot of opportunities for increasing that kind of technical discussion and cooperation, as a
So
couple of examples.
So one would think that for those technical areas and innovation, which the two countries, clearly are leading the world, that there shouldn't be concerns about national security. But even thinking about batteries, right, or EVs. In today's conversation, it's also become a national security conversation. Do you think, I mean, it'll be expanded to include all these things that you just mentioned, since they all have some kind of technology relevance. And because of that, it just seems that Washington, D.C., a lot of people have moved in that direction, trying to, make it very competitive in that sense.
Yeah, I will say to be honest, I think that the area of clean energy vehicles, technology, batteries, et cetera, those are going to be areas where it's going to be difficult for, as I see it, for
Even solar
cooperation.
panels, right?
Yeah.
Solar panels is the same thing,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think all of those are going to be areas where we're just. I think both sides have come to a mutual agreement that there's no room for cooperation, and that there will be commercial competition in those areas. But again, I would argue that that doesn't mean that closes off areas for other areas of cooperation. I mean, another example I would identify that the United States and China are not doing as much work on, in which they ought to try to find opportunities, is how to work together to deal with the climate challenges in third countries, particularly in emerging economies. Those are that's a very difficult issue, obviously, given the politics between the United States and China, as we kind of both look at the kind of the competition in the global South. But I think that there can be and should be creative minds that try to find opportunities in which we try to help these countries to make the changes that they're trying to make in a way that doesn't compromise at least the U.S. national interest.
Yeah, I have to ask a question, since you also served, in the Biden administration, in the State Department, and, special envoy for climate's office. What was it like when it seems that our diplomacy with China, or relationship with China, was so difficult, while the objective of your office was to seek cooperation? Was there anything that you can share?
Sure.
Concrete examples that,
Yeah.
maybe you were able to overcome the challenges, or, unfortunately, sometimes were not able to succeed.
Yeah, yeah. I will be honest. It was a challenging time, but nevertheless, I think that was there were examples there in which individual leaders can make a difference. As everybody well remembers, those first couple of years of the Biden administration, there were a lot of tensions in the U.S.-China relationship. But those tensions continue. I think that they're at a lower level. But at that time, President Biden, recognized that there was an important imperative of keeping the U.S.-China engagement on climate going, and so that gave Secretary Kerry, I think, the instruction and the guidance to work with his counterpart, Xie Jinping, to keep the conversation going and to keep the discussion about how each country was going to continue to do what it needed to do domestically. And there were conversations about trying to keep up the cooperation dialogue. Those were more difficult, but at least there were continued conversations about what we expected of each other on domestic action.
Yeah. And I think that, sort of a rare area of collaboration was also due to John Kerry's personal relationship with Xie Zhenhua over the years, right? And obviously both have retired. So now it's a new leadership on both sides. And with the change of administration, it's it's really hard to say if this will continue. Are you optimistic about that?
Yeah, what I would say is this. I think that the obviously the you can't replace the national government to national government engagement on climate. That's a critical channel, and I would say that uh, subsequent to Secretary Kerry's retirement, the John Podesta, who's the White House International Policy Climate Advisor, I think has continued that engagement with China quite well. He's had a long, long history of China climate engagement. So
Right.
that transition, I think, was actually quite smooth. What I would say is that going forward, we'll obviously see what happens in the election. What I will say is that regardless of the election outcome, there are a number of strong U.S.-China channels on climate change that are going to continue regardless. I think the most obvious one is the strong engagement that the state of California has had with both the national government in China, but also with at the provincial level. There are any number of technical conversations, policy conversations that have been going on for years, and I think that will continue both at the across many sectors,
Yeah.
including across transportation. And then
Yeah.
there are private sector involvement, a lot of non-governmental organizations and think tanks that have strong discussions that I think will continue to go regardless of what happens at the election. Those are continuing and will only increase.
Well, what are some of the other global priorities for the more progressive side of the political groups? We know that COP29, which is an annual UN meeting on climate change, is coming up. And are you aware of sort of, what are going to be discussed and what might be coming out as outcomes?
Yeah. So it's a good question, Wenchi. So for those in the audience who don't follow this as closely, there's every year there's a meeting of climate change policy officials from around the world. This year in mid-November, this year's meeting will be in Baku, Azerbaijan. Each year, there's usually it's a theme and or a priority issue, and the top priority issue for this year will be the question about financing for climate action. How, in particular, there's a focus on um, what developed countries will do in support of, in particular, the needs for climate action in developing countries. One of the key questions will be not only the responsibility that the major economies have, but also the contributions or commitments that countries like China ought to make, given notwithstanding China's characterization as a developing country, and obviously has great financial resources to contribute to this important global challenge, and so that will be one of the big topics, and it's obviously a priority for the United States to make sure that China um, increases its contribution, not simply through the channels that it controls, but also kind of, as a part of the global architecture that's dealing with climate change.
I'm actually very curious if there is a change of administration to a different party after the election. Do you think Trump administration will continue to participate in COP?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've seen some of the statements coming out of the campaign. What I will say is, and it's hard to forecast what that would look like. But what I will say is, when President Trump was in office, he obviously withdrew the United States from the Paris Agreement, but he continued to have the government participate in the UN climate um, process. And that was an important step for him, for the United States, because uh, when you're in the room, even if you have objections or concerns, that's actually even more of a reason to be a part of
Mhm.
the discussion. And so I think that his administration recognized that. I don't, but again, hard for me to speculate if he were to win, if he would take the same approach.
Well, lastly, obviously the election is on everyone's mind. So if there was a Harris administration, do you anticipate that it will continue much of the Biden administration's policy, especially on climate?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, obviously, what happens in the election, and what I will say is that, there is a lot of work that continues to need to be done coming out of these last 4 years in the Biden administration. The many people look at the Inflation Reduction Act, which is,
Mhm.
basically a big climate change legislation that has driven a lot of investment, and including a lot of investment coming from Taiwan into the United States. Um, but that there is the legislation calls for tax benefits and policy incentives that last for 10 years.
Mhm.
So I would contend that whoever the next president will be, um, that person will have to look at what the opportunities and requirements are coming out of the IRA, and will then have to make a decision about how strongly to execute on the implementation of it. I think that many people are recognizing, including in many parts of the United States, that have that are controlled by Republicans, that these are investments that are making strong positive benefits both on the economic development and job side, but also in addressing climate. So I think it'll be an interesting question for whoever the next president will be.
Yeah, it does feel that regardless of your politics, right? I think there's been so much investment resources poured into trying to tackle this challenge. And of course, everyone is experiencing climate change in real time. And so it would be very hard to discontinue a lot of the efforts on a systematic level. So, with that, I want to thank you for joining us today to help us understand a different perspective on U.S.-China relationship, with a view of some of the global challenges that are very, very urgent, obviously, including facing the world, including Taiwan. So, thank you, Alan. We hope to have you back. Take care.
Thank you, Wenchi.